Hello and welcome to the Azure Back to School presentation. This presentation is going to be on Windows Virtual Desktop. So, first of all, a bit about me. My name's Neil McLoughlin. I'm a senior Citrix and WVD architect working for a company called New Signature here in the UK. I've been doing VDI probably for around 10 years now. Over the past 12 months, really sort of focused in on Azure and WVD. So I'm hoping to sort of share some of that knowledge that I've learned with you today. I am also the co-founder of the WVD community group. That's a sort of a user group that was been set up. We've now got stuff throughout the world, which is quite good. We do a weekly podcast, and we do a weekly newsletter as well as some other activities. So head over to wvdcommunity.com and just to have a look, see what we're doing over there. I'm also founder of the UK WVD user group, and myself, along with Kirk Ryan from NetApp. We run that where we run meetings once a month. Sort of they give presentations and have a bit of a chit chat about the latest news on WVD. I'm also a Citrix CTA. I'm heavily involved with Citrix, and also I'm an MVP. This is my first year as an MVP, so that's a quite good thing to have. You can find me on virtualmic.co.uk, or you can head over to wvdcommunity.com. That is also my LinkedIn address as well. If you want to hit me up on there, that's fine. So today I'm going to show you a sort of high-level overview of WVD. We're going to do an overview. We're going to create a host pool. We're going to go through some basic design decisions that you need to make when you're creating that host pool and adding VMs. And we're going to take a look and see what it actually looks like, so we can see what we've done. So, Windows Virtual Desktop. So this diagram is basically taken off the Microsoft site, but it's basically a very high level overview of what WVD is. So I think of WVD as two things. Number one, it's a service which is a desktop broker essentially. So you have desktops held within Azure, and the WVD service is the broker to those desktops. So, and also it consists of Windows 10 multi-session, which is an Azure only operating system, which essentially enables you to have multi-session capability with a Windows 10 operating system. Previously, this was only available during Windows Server. Obviously, there's cost benefits that you get from that, and also application compatibility as well. So some applications just will not run well on Windows Server because obviously they're designed as a desktop operating system. So Windows 10 multi-session kind of fixes all those problems. So from a client perspective, you can connect in from multiple ways. So you can use your mobile device, you can use your Android, iOS, you can use your tablets. There's a HTML client, HTML5 client, sorry, as well. And also there's a Windows and Mac client as well. There's also a Windows Store client as well if you need it. So there's lots of multiple ways of supporting of connecting into WVD. And then we move on to the actual service itself. So the actual broker is managed by Microsoft. So that sits within their data centers. So it is a sort of true kind of what you could say platform as a service. So you don't touch any of it. It's fully managed by Microsoft. So they look after the web access, diagnostics, broker, the gateway, or the networking, the databases, all that stuff's managed for you. So if you're coming from a Citrix background, you'd be familiar the Citrix Cloud. It's very similar to that, where Citrix manages that for you. The same here with WVD. So now to the stuff that you manage. So obviously you need to manage something. So you are responsible for your own Azure subscription. Under that Azure subscription, you need to make sure that you have an Azure Active Directory. WVD will not work without Azure AD. If you've got Office 365 license or users in your environment, you will already have Azure AD. You may not know it, but you do. So that's a prerequisite that you have to have. That's a non-negotiable, so you have to have Azure AD. We also need a Active Directory environment as well. So WD needs to be able to join the machines to a domain. Whether that domain is sitting on a physical domain controller that's linked over to site-to-site VPN, or it could be a virtual domain controller that's sitting in within your Azure subscription, which is the most common thing I see out there in the wild. So people would generally build within their Azure subscription a virtual Active Directory domain controller. And then that becomes responsible for all the LDAP traffic within that Azure subscription. So it saves sort of LDAP requests having to go over your sort of VPN link, which can quicker, more secure, all that good stuff. And obviously you're responsible for the operating system and the applications within that subscription. So you need to build that master VM. You can use the Azure Marketplace images which are provided, but obviously they just have the basic operating system. So if you want to install your own line of business applications, you can spin up your own image within Azure, basically sys prep it and use that as a template to build your WVD desktops from. And also we have profile management as well. So we have a tool called FS Logics. FS Logics is like a sort of, you could call it a container-based profile management solution where each profile is actually held on a VHD file or VHDX file that sits on Azure Files or a NetApp Azure NetApp file share, or you can build a virtual file server within the subscription as well. So each profile sits on the VHDX/container file, and that gets mounted when the user logs on. FS Logics has a write filter built into it, which basically redirects anything that goes into the user's profile. So see user/first name.last name is redirected onto the container. So it's a real-time read-write thing. There's no synchronization or anything. When you are logged on and writing, you are writing right to the user's profile, which is mounted remotely. So that's pretty much it. That's a very high level overview. Over the next few slides, we are going to sort of introduce you to how that all fits together and you can see it in action. So move over to the next slide. So how to create a host pool. What I've done, I've pre-recorded a video for you. So I'm going to play that now, and then after we've done that, we'll move over to the next one. Okay, enjoy. Hi, so in this section, we are going to create a host pool. A host pool is basically where your VMs are held. So we will go to the Azure portal, go to the Windows Virtual Desktop, and click on Create a Host Pool. So these are the VMs which the users will be connecting to. So we click on Create a Host Pool. We select our subscription. We select our resource group. So if you know where a resource group is a sort of a collection of resources that you want to group together. So I would highly recommend creating a separate resource group for WVD. If you are quite a large environment, you would basically create a resource group per department maybe. Then you can delegate permissions and billing and all that stuff. So here we're just going to select WVD Lab as my resource group. I'm going to select my host pool name. So I'm going to select it back to school as my host pool name. I'm going to select my location. So this is the metadata. So this is the configuration information for WVD essentially. At the moment it's just for the US, but I think the long-term goal is to have these throughout the whole world. So at the moment I'm just going to select East US as a location. Validation environment is going to be no. I'll explain what that is later. So host pool type. So personal or pooled. I'm going to select a personal desktop. Actually, no, I'll select a pooled desktop for fun. So number of Mac users, I'm going to select 5 maximum users. and I'm going to select breadth or depth. So again, I'll explain what these are in another section. So we're going to click on next for virtual machines. Add virtual machines to my host pool. Yes, obviously we want stuff for people to connect to. So resource group, WVD lab that we selected previously, virtual machine location for the metadata, ETUS, virtual machine size. So here I'm going to select chain size. So here we can select our different machine sizes that you want to create. So I'm just going to select, say, a default S version 3. So that'll give me 4 vCPU, 16 gigs of RAM. So quite a decent machine. So I'm going to select next. Number of VMs. I just want to create one VM. Name prefix. So here you put the name prefix for VM. Make sure you get this right because you can't change it afterwards. So I'm just going to call this VM test. So image type gallery. So here we can select what type of image we want to roll out. So obviously here we want to use Windows 10 multi-session. So I'm going to go to browse all images, so we can set the gallery or storage blob. So storage blob is you have your own custom image. I'm going to set gallery. I'm going to browse all images, and then I'm going to search for multi-session. So here we go, multi in here, and see here we have Windows 10 Enterprise multi-session. So I'm going to select this one, which is the very latest version, with Microsoft 365 already pre-installed for you. So that's selected that. I'm going to select my OS type disk as premium or standard HDD. I think for this test I'll just pick standard, keep the cost down a bit. And then use manage disk automatically set to yes. Network and security. Virtual machine location. So I'm going to select UK South as my location, and here is automatically put up my details of my virtual network. So virtual network, WVD lab, and my subnets. So I'm going to select the default subnet, but you can define your own subnets if you want to. Public IP, no. Network security group basic, plugin inputs, no. Specify name. So if I wanted to, I could select my domain or unit. For this test, I'm just going to select no. It's just going to do a straight domain join. So let me just make sure. Yeah, domain join. So I'm going to select yes. So my domain details are going to be virtual bank.local. Your path is optional, so if you had a specific OU you wanted to go into, you could select that in there. My domain join account, that's going to be local. My password, see, I'm not going to tell you what that is. Okay, so workspace. So I'm going to register against an existing app group, which is what the users will see. Or maybe not. Have I got the location right? Okay, I thought I had one. So create a new one. Back to school. School app. Apps. Yep. Okay. I'm going to go to my tags. So here you can select your tags. So if you're using tags for management or billing or however you're using tags, here you can select the resource. So let's test. Let's go tag. Tag 1, 2, 3. So you can select the tags what you want to reply to. So the whole group, availability, set, host pool, image, whatever. So maybe So tag there, and then you can select a department, finance, for example. Okay, new and create. So here we get a screen where we can review our options. So description, Azure sponsorship, resource name, DVD lab. So you can double check that you've got all those settings correct before you create the VM. And then once you are ready, you can click that create button. And that should be that. And off it will go. So normally it takes around 10 to 50 minutes to create a host pool and a VM in it. That generally doesn't seem to change much depending on how many you create. So you can create up to, I think it's 500 VMs at a time if you want to, which is quite impressive. So even if you create 20 VMs, it should still only take you a short amount of time. So I'm going to stop it there. Obviously, you don't want to be sat here watching this for the next 10 minutes. So I will show you the results at the end of this presentation. Thank you. Goodbye. Okay, so now that we've got our host pool created, we'll move on to part 2. So I will start the next video now. And this will hopefully show you a complete host pool. Hello. Okay, so we are back now. I'm hoping that the resource pool has created successfully. So, or the host pool, sorry. So as you can see, we have our host pool. So deployment is complete, which means it has completed successfully. If you click on there, notifications, you should see there. So if it fails, you can go in here and have a look in there as well. So here, if you want to, you can look at the steps which are involved. So as you can see, it's quite basic. So created host pool, create the application groups, link to the VM template. So also, if you want to have a look, you can click on, say, operation details, for example, and that will show you exactly what it was doing if you want to look into that a bit more detail. So what we're going to do, we're going to go to resource. So as we can see, here is our host pool that we created, the size that we selected earlier, the OS disk type pooled. So total session hosts equals 1. So we just created 1. So if you created 50, for example, you'd see them here. So here we can go to session hosts, and there is our VM that we created. So obviously we called it VM test 1. You see it's put a -0 on the end, so it will append the number of VMs that you put in there. So if you put 50 VMs in there, for example, that will be VM test 1-0 to 50. And that automatically appends it for you. So as you can see, status is available. Train mode off, which means you're allowed to connect to it. Assign user, we haven't got any users assigned in a moment, but we can do that a bit later. Active sessions equals 0, DB lab is equals 0. Yeah, so we can also go in there and just have a look at the basics there. So if we also go in and have a look in the virtual machines, so if we click on virtual machines, and there is our VM. So virtual machine running, resource groups in the WVD lab, and it's just a market-based image as we selected earlier. Here you can just, as you can see, it's just another VM. There's nothing special about it. So essentially a WVD VM is basically obviously Windows 10 multi-session, but you just install the agent onto the VM, which is done automatically for you, and that enables your users connect to it via the WVD broker. So, okay, that's it. So as you can see, we've successfully created a host pool, which is created the VM, and that VM is now ready for connections, which we will cover later. Thank you. Okay, on to the next one. So
Hello.
now we will go over to some basic design decisions that we need to make for Windows Virtual Desktop. So as you go through to create a host pool, there are certain things you have to select. So I'm just going to give you a sort of very high level overview of some ways you can think about those decisions. So off we go.
Okay, so let's now talk about some architectural decisions that you need to make, or some choices. So essentially, when we create a host pool, there are a couple of decision points that you need to make. So let's talk through those. So let's obviously go to the new host pool. So subscriptions, obviously within Azure, you can have multiple subscriptions. Some people do those via department, some people do those via technology. So you need to decide which subscription your WVD deployment is going to go into. You have to have the subscription that has your Azure AD users synced into it. So that's a key requirement. So make sure that the subscription that you're about to deploy WVD into, you're able to view your Azure AD users in that same subscription. So that's quite a critical point. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to assign any users to your WVD platform. To check that, you can just go into let me get that Azure AD, Azure Active Directory, and then from there you should hopefully be able to see that you have users in there. Okay, so that's that first decision point that you need to make. So then go back to your host pools, add a new host pool. So we know what our subscription is going to be. Second point, resource group. As I touched on lightly in the previous video, resource groups are kind of groupings. You can define them by, again, technology area or by department or however you want to manage your environment. Some people do it via costing, some people do it via host pools, for example. If you want to have a different resource, it all depends how big your environment is going to be. If you've got a large enterprise environment, then you probably need to put a lot more thought into how you're going to spread that out. Small deployments, generally I just put all the WVD resources into a single group, resource group, and then you can easily report on those, delegate permissions, that kind of stuff. Okay, so once we've selected our resource group, we would then need to select the host pool name. So this will be the naming convention that you want to pick. So you can say, for example, UK multi-session so, or maybe UK Win10 2004 I don't know, GPU, for example. So you need to make it so you can easily identify what's in there. So that's some other advice. So location. This is the metadata location. So at the moment, you can only select the US locations, but generally, hopefully at some time, all the locations worldwide are going to become available. And then obviously, the best practice is going to be select the location which is closest to you for best performance. Validation environment. So the validation environment basically tells you whether to deploy the latest preview agents to the VM. When you deploy a host pool, it will automatically install the latest WVD agents onto that VM for you. If you select a validation environment, that will essentially mean that it will install preview agents, i.e. not ones that are in general release. So if you have a test environment, or if you do UAT testing, or if you have an update ring or something like that, then you can select validation environment there. So generally, I normally enable it if we've got UAT users, or if we've got a test pool, or something like that. Obviously, that just means you can test the latest and greatest agents without affecting any production users. So always let them know for that. Host pool type. So we've got two types of host pools we can select: a personal or pooled. A personal host pool type will mean that each person is assigned a VM individually. It's a one-to-one mapping between your users and your VM. So if you got, say, a requirement that the users need to have their own VM, and whether that they've got application need a license, or they need that guaranteed performance, or whatever decision point you have, you can select a personal VM. If you have a requirement around pooled VMs, so a pooled VM would mean that you have multiple users connecting onto the same VM. So personal VM, one-to-one, pooled, one-to-many. Normally, it's better from a cost-saving perspective to pick a pooled. If your applications work okay in a pooled multi-session environment, always pick pooled if you can. Obviously, there is a performance impact with people logging onto the same desktop, but from a cost-saving perspective, it makes perfect sense. So that's another decision point. Are you going to go with personal, or are you going to go with pooled? It's all down to your specific requirement. Most environments I work in have a mixture. So some people have a personal pool for those performance users who need that performance. Other people have a generic pooled for basic Office users, for example. But again, it all comes down to your personal requirements. So we can select pooled, for example. So if you go down to pooled, you can select the maximum number of users that you want on each VM. So you need to determine this number by doing some testing. Obviously that number of users depends on the size of the VM and the applications running on that VM. So you need to determine your own number. There is some generic guidelines out there. I think it's general for performance users, for example, it's 2 users per vCPU. But it's critical that you do your own testing because everyone's environment is different. So say, for example, we can put 5 in here, which would basically mean that 5 users will connect to each VM, and then the number 6 user will go onto the next VM along. That is what we call depth first. So the other decision point is what you call breadth or depth. So the load balancer algorithm works where basically if you've got breadth first, if I've got 5 VMs, or multi-session users, my maximum capacity is, for example, 25 users. Okay, so user A would go on to VM number 1, user B will go on to VM number 2, user C would go on to VM number 3, for example, and then when it got to that user number 6, that would then go back onto the first VM until all those VMs filled up. That's breadth first. So essentially, you are going scaling out to get your best performance, which mean that you will get the least number of users possible that you can do, while using all of your VMs. Some people prefer depth first. So breadth first is probably going to cost you a bit more money because you're using more of your resources. So if you've got 5 VMs, 5 users, for example, they will go onto a single VM if you've got 5 users configured. If you've got depth, if you've got breadth first, those 5 users will use 5 separate VMs, if that makes sense. So if you want to scale out, use breadth. If you want to scale up, use depth. So depth would mean basically all those users will go onto that one single VM until it was full, and then they move on to the next and move on to the next. So depth is good where cost saving scenarios where you want to maximize the use of those VMs, and you're using power management, for example. So if you've got depth first configured and those VMs, or for 4 VMs are not being used because you've got 5 users on that first VM, that means those 4 VMs will be powered down because we're not using them. So, and then as soon as the CPU utilization goes up on the first VM, then we can power on more VMs. Okay. And so your next decision point is going to be around your virtual machines. So sizing. So obviously we've got a location. In here we can select multiple locations. So you should always place your VMs closest to your users if you can. If you've got users throughout the world, then I would suggest creating multiple host pools for those locations. That would essentially mean that the user experience would be better. So you wouldn't have users in the US connecting back to the UK, for example, and vice versa. So if I've got users in Japan, I want to make sure my host pools are in Japan. I don't want Japanese users connecting back to the UK. There is a calculator. There's a website which you can go on. I can't remember it right now, which will tell you the response time in milliseconds, where you'll go for your users. So let me see if I can find that for you. WD Experience Estimator. Yep, that's it there. So essentially what you can do, you can go in here, and what that is basically going to tell me is going to tell me the response time of the VMs if it decides to work. It can be a bit slow. Let's try it again. There you go. So as obviously I'm in the UK, so my response times are lower. If I go back down, for example, if I were to connect back to Australia, then I have obviously 290 millisecond response time, which is round trip time, which is not good. Same in Japan. So always place your host pools and virtual machine locations as close to your users as you can. Machine sizing. So we have multiple machine sizes within Azure. So generically, D series is good. So D series is general use. If you want a bit more CPU horsepower, you can pick a F series. If you want GPU VMs, you can pick your NVIDIA or Tesla. So AMD. So you can, let's add our filter for family, and in here we can, for example, select general purpose. So B series generally for testing, D series is for general use, and also here you can select multiple sizes depending on what you want. Obviously, bigger you go, the more it's going to cost you. So the secret is to find that sweet spot. Generally, I find the sweet spot sits around the these ones here. So the D16s, for example. And they're also, just beware as well, they've recently released a new V4. So V3s up until yesterday were the latest ones. We now have the V4 ones, which have newer and faster CPUs in them. So you can go right up to, say, 48 vCPUs, 192 gigs of RAM, for example, but it's going to cost you. So that's essential runtime of £2,600 per month for one VM, which is quite expensive. But if you drop down to, say, a D4, let's have a look at that. So we can also do a search in here. So let's have a look at D4S version 3, for example. That's going to cost you £200 a month. So obviously there's a massive cost difference there. So it depends on how many users you want to fit on that VM. So GPUs, you can select a GPU VM. So here, so we have we'd have the different sizes there. So I'm not going to go into massive detail here, but basically the decision is if you want an AMD or whether you want a NVIDIA. There are specific models which are tied for VDI environments or better for VDI environments. I have a presentation coming up which I'll go into detail about that. But obviously GPUs are also going to cost you quite a lot as well. But if you've got graphic intensive workloads, then it's highly recommended to do a GPU. I've also found with some customers as well, the video conferencing becomes bearable with a GPU VM, wherever if you're not using the Teams redirection, it can be unusable in a non-GPU VM. So pick your VM sizings wisely, because if you pick the wrong one, it will end up costing you lots of money, or it will cost you from a performance perspective. The name prefix, so this is the name that your VMs are going to be called. This is quite key also because this is the base template, so if you call it VM test, for example, all the VMs will automatically be called VM test 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. You can't change that. So make sure you get that right. So just as any other, if you were doing physicals, you need to make sure you pick your VM naming convention that kind of makes sense to you, so you can easily identify the number of the VMs. Obviously, we can select the number of VMs, so we can put up to 500 in here. So I can pick 500, then off it go, and it'll create 500 VMs. Obviously, I'm not going to do that because it'll end up costing me lots of money. So your image type, as we touched on this briefly before, we can select the image which is in the Windows 10 with gallery as your marketplace. So we've got the options of Windows 10 multi-session, Windows 2004 or 1909, or you can select your own image. I'm not going to go massively into image management because that's a completely different ballgame. There's lots more to that. But essentially, we can either create our own custom image in Azure, or we can import your existing image if you have one as well. I'd always recommend creating your own image. So what I normally do is deploy a marketplace image and then layer my applications on top of that. And that enables you to have the multi-session capability. I know some customers just directly import their image, but that means that you don't have Windows 10 multi-session, so you're not getting all the benefits that WVD brings to you. So now we've got our image, and the next decision point is our OS disk type. So we've got standard SSD, premium SSD, or standard HDD. Always go for SSD at minimum if you can. If cost is a real issue, then you can select standard HDD, but I would not recommend it. So premium versus standard. So basically, standard SSD will give you up to 500 IOPS. In most cases, I think if you go above 2 terabytes, the IOPS start to increase on that, but by out of the box, that's going to give you a maximum of 500 IOPS. Now, that might seem like a lot, but when you start layering lots of users onto a VM, that can run out very quickly. When you start talking about search indexes and AV scanning and all that fun stuff, those IOPS can disappear quite quickly. So monitor your IOPS if you can. Premium SSD I would recommend it if you can afford it. It is double the cost, but storage VMs is quite low anyway. I think for a 127 gig SSD, you're only talking like £16 a month, which is not too bad. So if you have like 10 VMs, that's only £160 a month. So it's not okay. So always choose premium, but if cost is an issue, choose standard, but be wary that you're limited to 500 IOPS. Now it comes down to your networking. So your network, so let me just change that to UK South. UK South. So essentially what we have here, so we can select our networks. So the key point about the network is the network which you have described, you need to basically ensure that it has connectivity back to your either on-prem or Azure domain controllers. The reason why this is because when you join when your VMs do the domain join, they have to join a real Active Directory domain. So your DNS has to be pointing to that Active Directory domain, otherwise it's not going to resolve it. So you need to make sure that your virtual network and your subnet has the DNS settings pointing to your let me show you. So for example, what I did, I have my virtual network, Virtual network here. So this is my WVD network, and in here I have, where are you? Yep, so you can see these are all my devices connected to that. I've got these in a private IP address. And then if I go to DNS servers, so in here you can see I've got a custom DNS server which is pointing to my DNS, the Active Directory domain DNS server. So without that, the domain join would not work. That's a common mistake I see people make, so be wary of that. Do not leave it at the default, always put it at custom. Also, do not set the DNS server on the actual server itself. Always configure your settings here. If you set it on the server itself, it will break. So, beware of that. And then obviously we've got our network security group. So if you've got network security restrictions that you have to put in place, you can select those here. Select a domain or OU unit. Also public inbound ports. So I select no. I access all my stuff through a Bastion host because it's the most secure way of doing it. If you select yes, it means that there will be a public IP address associated with that VM, and it will be accessible via RDP only, but still accessible from the VM. So domain to join, obviously your Active Directory domain, your OU path. So in here you can put your OU path in there that you want to do the domain join for. The AD domain join UPN. So this has to be a service account which has domain join permissions. So that could be like test@test.com. In my earlier video before, you saw us perform that. So that's quite explanatory. Password, yeah. So that's pretty much it from a decision point. Next to the workspace. So we only generally have one workspace, which you saw before. So you can look at next. Tags. So in here we can select our tags, as I covered as well earlier before. The tags you can configure to do reporting, costings, whatever you want to set them to. So it's always recommended to do tags. So there's plenty of articles on how to do tagging properly and that stuff. So have a look into that as well. It makes managing your costs and environment a lot easier. You can also do like you can run policies against tags, for example. You can set power management via tags. They're very, very powerful. So have a look into those. And that is pretty much it. I'm not going to press the create button because it's going to create 500 VMs. So I hope that that presentation was okay. And if you have any questions, please feel okay to reach out to me. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye. Okay, so now we've created our host pool and we created our desktop. I've assigned a user in the background. So now we can test the logon to that desktop to make sure that everything's okay. So I've downloaded the remote desktop client. I've launched it. So we need to log in. So make sure there's no one logged in. So I click on the subscribe button. So subscribe button will subscribe me to the workspace. I'm going to click on use another account and then I'm going to select my login VSI test account. So there you go. So login VSI test 01. Okay, and then I'm going to select my password. Okay, so we're in. As you can see, we've managed to enumerate the host pool. So this is the host pool that we created earlier, beta school underscore apps. So what we can do here is we can right click on this desktop also and customize some settings. So I'll turn off so display settings. So I'm going to select this to single display. I'm going to turn off starting full screen. Fit session to window, update resolution and resize. Okay, good. So if I now click on that, it's going to ask me again for my credentials. Click on OK. And there we are. We can see us logging into our brand new shiny desktop. So as you can see, we have a full Windows OS, so WinVert. So this is running Windows 2004, and as we can see, it's the Windows 10 Windows 10 Enterprise for virtual desktops, which basically means it's Windows 10 multi-session capable. So if we wanted to, we could have multiple users log on to this one VM. Obviously, we have the standard Office suite in there, and also your Microsoft Edge and stuff. So you can install your own applications on there, do what you want to do, build your own image and stuff like that. So it's all good. And obviously we have a C drive, the operating system on it. So yep, all good. So I hope you've enjoyed this session. So we've essentially, from scratch, we've created a host pool. We've built a VM into that host pool, and we successfully logged onto that VM as well using the client and customize some settings. So thank you very much for your time and enjoy the rest of your day.
That's the end of this presentation. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions around WVD, feel free to reach out to me. My details, you virtual obviously look at the first slide, but you'll find me on Twitter at virtualmank, also virtualmank.co.uk, and also wvdcommunity.com. So thank you very much for your time, and I hope you have lots more fun with WVD. Thank you. Goodbye.